friends, Tiffany here. Welcome to my quilting life. So today we are going to work on a pattern, and the pattern is called Town Square, right here. So it's called Town Square by Bear Hug Quiltworks, and it's a panel quilt. So this panel can be any panel. It's building around the panel is what we're doing. It doesn't look like it by the picture, but if you look at the examples, there's this one, and on the back there's another example right there. So you can take any panel for this and make a quilt out of it. So for this one, it says on the back that you need 1 1/4 yard of focus. So that's your panel. So you need a panel that's 1 1/4 yards, 10 fat quarters, some 2 1/2 inch strips, 1/2 yard for binding, and 3 3/4 yard for your backing, and it makes a quilt that's 60 by 60. Now the panel, which would be the focus, should be a panel that measures like 40 1/2 by 40 1/2 or something that's bigger than that because it's going to get trimmed down, because the way I'm going to make it is not the way the pattern says to make it. So I'm going to show you a roundabouts, and we'll be just jumping through the pattern for this one. So again, we're going to make this. It's Town Square by Bear Hug Quiltworks, designed by Lisa Alley. So if you want to look up this pattern, that's how you would find it on their online, I guess, www.bearhugquiltworks.com. So let's get to making this, and we're going to work with some fat quarters, and I'm going to show you how to put this together. I'm not going to give you the measurements because it's not my pattern and I can't do that, but I could show you how to do everything and put it all together. So let's get to it. All right, to start out, we need our panel. So this is the panel that I am using for this. It came with the kit, so you can see everything is going to go with this panel. Then we need 10 fat quarters. So here's 1. Here's number 2, number 3, number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I think this is actually the binding right there. And here's 10 right here. So this one's the binding. And as you can see, they go with the panel. So it's the coordinating prints from the panel. And lots of fabric lines do that. They'll have a panel and some coordinating prints that go with it, or all of their prints coordinate with a panel that they put out in their line. So if you find something like that, pick it up, and you'll have this video to make your panel quilt called Town Square Bear Hug Quiltworks. Woo, long word for me to say. Anyways, let's get to pressing all of our fabrics. Now that I have all of my fabrics pressed and they lay flat, I'm going to separate all 10 fat quarters into 2 piles of 10. I mean 2 piles of 5. My goodness, I can't speak. So 2 piles of 5. I'm going to set one aside for now, one of my piles, and work on the first pile and make all of the cuts. So let's get to some cutting. The pattern will tell you what to cut. So for now, I'm just going to place this aside, and we're going to start with the pile number 1. And I'm going to line it up. All of these are lined up on the selvage, so I'm going to line this up nicely, just like this. I'm going to take my rotary cutter and my ruler, and I'm going to first start off by making a nice straight line through all 5 of these pieces. So I'm just going to line it up, making sure that it's cutting all 5 all the way from one end to another. Nice straight line. So here we go. And I should have gotten all 5, and I did. So all 5 have been trimmed. Now we're going to go to the first measurement that's in the pattern. So here we go. We're going to line this up to the number it says to in the pattern. So I'm going to line up my ruler where it says to cut and make my cuts. So there's my first one, and then I'm going to go ahead and make my second cuts. So I'm just going to line up the ruler and do that with my third. And then I'm going to set aside the remaining fabric. Then I'm going to go ahead and subcut now. So I'm going to turn these this way, turn this way. I'm going to grab a different ruler, and remember I lined all my salvages up, so I'm going to put those beyond a line on my mat, making sure that it's going to catch every single one of them. I'm going to go ahead and make my first cut to cut off all the salvages. And then I'm going to come over the amount it says to in the pattern. And then I'm going to do that a second time. And then I'm going to set aside the leftover piece. So those are cut first. Set it aside. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut one strip that I cut off. We're going to go ahead and line this up on a line. Cut off the salvages all at the same time. Discard those. Come over your first number. And come over your second number. Again, setting aside. So there's those cuts. Now for the third. Just going to line it up. Cut the selvage off. Come over my first cut. And my second cut. So I'm just going to put all these pieces together right here, and I'm going to grab my next fat quarter pile. Okay, here we are, second fat quarter pile. I'm going to start by making a nice straight line on one of the sides. Oops, it almost got the whole thing. There we go, it got all the pieces. Now we're going to come over our first number again. We're going to repeat the same numbers on this stack that we did the last, and the pattern will tell you what to cut. Now it's time to take, you should have 20, enough for 20 squares. We're going to take one, and you can see I still have selvage here, but that's within the 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then we're going to take an opposite color. So just find an opposite color. And those will go with this one. And then again, we're going to do that same thing. So take one of these and your opposite color, and we're going to pair them up. And I'm just going to go ahead and repeat this process. So now, as you can see, I paired everything up. So you should have had 2 big squares and then cut 4 strips. And the only reason why I did 2 at first is because I want to make sure that I'm separating all the colors. So there was 5 colors in each pile. Okay, so I separated them so that they're a little bit different for each pile. So each pair should have 2 opposite colors that are not the same and that complement each other. So let's go over to the sewing machine so I can show you how to make one block, and then we will chain piece the rest of them. So here we are at the machine, and I have all the pieces for one block. Make sure that you are going to be sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to get started. So we're going to take our 2 shorter ones that are the same size as our big square. We're going to put one on each side. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So 1 for each side. They are exactly the same size, so you shouldn't have any problem attaching these to your square. After you have those 2 sides attached, you could either go over to the ironing board at this point, or you can finger press them back away from the center. These colors are very bold, so nothing's really going to show behind it. So now we're going to turn the block so it's up and down, and we're going to take these long pieces and put one right sides together on one side and one on the other. And as you can see, they are exactly the same size. ahead, turn that, and take your last piece and put it on the opposite side. Again, it should be exactly the same size. And then you're going to go ahead and finger press it back. Or take it to the ironing board. And there we have one block. So let's go to the ironing board and press this. Here we are at the ironing board. I'm just going to lay my block down and I'm going to press it with the iron. And there we have one block. Now that we have one block made, we're going to repeat this step 19 times. So here is my stacks. As you can see, they're scattered on the table. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stack them all up, and I'm going to show you how I'm doing this so that I can chain piece everything together. So I'm going to go ahead and set my one block aside, and I'm going to grab a pile. It doesn't matter which pile I grab. And I'm going to start with this first one. And you're going to see how I manage to piece all this together quickly. So I'm going to take one of these on each side and then one of these on top and bottom. So I'm going to lay the block out just like that. Then I'm going to take the next stack, side, top and bottom, side and side, and the one I paired it with. I'm going to stack it up. So then I'm going to take the next stack, one on top and bottom, one on side and side, and then my middle. And I'm going to repeat this until they're all stacked up. Now that we have a stacked pile, I'm going to scoot over towards the sewing machine, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew all of these together first. Then they'll be connected, and then we're going to take it to the ironing. We'll snip them apart in the order of which I sewed them. Take them to the iron, press them open, and then repeat, setting the pile back in the same spot. And you will see that I will be able to get all of these attached, keeping them in order, and then all of these attached, keeping them in order, all of the top and the bottom, keeping everything in order. So I'm going to go to the machine with this stack first, and we're going to sew them all together. And you're going to see they're going to stay in order. Here we are at the machine. I have my big blocks to my left hand and my skinny strips to my right hand. And I'm going to go ahead and chain piece all these through and sew them. I'm going to put you in fast forward while I do so, and then you'll see when I come to the end, while it's in fast forward, that I snip them all apart and I stack them to keep them in order. So just keep everything in order. Now that I have kept everything in order, we're going to go upside down, take it over to the iron, and I'm going to press all these back, keeping them in order. So as I press this one, I'll stack the next one on top of it. And you will see how I keep it all in order. So let's go to the iron. Okay, so we have them upside down still. All I'm going to do is take the top one in the upside down position, press it back, set it aside just like that. Take the next one, stack it on top. Take the next one, stack it on top, and so on and so forth. So let me finish this and we will attach the next piece when I'm done. Alright, as you can see, they are in the right order. That matches, that matches, that matches, so on and so forth. So they're still in the correct order. Now we're going to take this side and attach it to this side of that square. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine and do that. Here we are at the machine. So I'm going to put my biggest piece to my left and my strips to my right. And I'm going to have to move these down out of the way because they're going to just get in the way. We're going to pull one at a time and we're going to attach the opposite side. So when they're all done, they will have one on each side of the block like that. So I'm going to go ahead and chain piece these through and then pluck them off exactly in the order that I sewed them. And then press them all. Here we are, back in order, the way they go. You want to make sure you just roll them back, just like this, and see that they are all still in order. Now I'm going to attach one side and then the other. This time I'm not going to go to the iron. I'm just going to attach all of these, pluck them off, and then attach all of these and then pluck them off. And they're going to all be chain pieced, and then I'll have all 20, because we made this one first, all 20 blocks will be done and ready for the next step. All right, every block is pressed. And now we're ready for the next step. This next step has no seams to match. We're gonna take 4 of these and I'm gonna turn them. So instead of having them the short seams right here and short seams right here, trying to nest those, we're just gonna turn them. 1 turn so that the long no seams matches up with the seams. So we're gonna go ahead and take 4 of these. So I'm just gonna take 4 blocks with some contrast. Let's do this one right here. So here's my 4 blocks. And what I'm gonna do is hook them together end to end. So I'm gonna hook this to that, to that. And then I'm gonna repeat and grab 4 more. So we're gonna take 1, 2, 3. Oh, those have the same middle. And let's see. That's the same outside. 3. And come on. I need a 4th. A 4th. 4. There we go. So I'm going to take 4 for one set and 4 for the other, and then these I'm going to set aside the excess, because what we're going to do is we're going to hook 4 together and 4 together, and this is going to give us our next step. Just bear with me. You will get the next step from how we do this. Again, I'm doing it totally different than the pattern, but it's pretty much exactly the pattern, just my way or my version of it. So here we are. Again, the 2 seams are going to come to the one that has no seams. So I'm going to put them right sides together. They should be exactly the same size. And I am going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. The reason why we're doing it this way is because everyone's 1/4 inch seam is different. And not every panel is going to be the right size. So there's the first 2 together. And I'm just going to go ahead and finger press this to the side that has the long straight piece. Then I'm going to grab another one. So we're going to reach over and grab another piece, and you can see this is the straight one with no seams, so we're going to attach it to the one that has the 2 seams. That way there's no nesting to be done. So again, I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to also make sure that my seams stay down. Don't get flipped because we want a nice and flat quilt. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and press that towards the singular strip that has no piecing. And then we're going to grab the next one, so that'll give us the 4. And again, this has 2 seams. We're going to find the side that has no seams, right sides together, and hook those together. And I'm just going to sew a little bit, then hold my blocks. And just like that, I'm just going to go ahead and finger press this one to the one side. And for now, I'm going to set this row aside. All right, here we go with the next set. Again, 2 seams, no seam, right sides together. Just going to line them up. 1/4 inch seam. Finger press it for now towards the side that has no seam. Then we're going to grab another one and we're going to attach it with the seam, because this is a no seam. And what I mean by that seam and no seam is, see the 2 seams here? We don't want to nest anything. So just lining them up. on down. Again, I'm going to press it towards the side that has no seam. Then I'm going to grab my 4th, and we're going to hook that on just like this. So lining up at the top, lining it up at the bottom. And I'm going to finger press this one towards the side that doesn't have a seam. Now we're going to take and press these, and then I'm going to show you the next step to make this so much easier to make. So I've gone ahead and pressed. I have my 2 pieces that I just sewn the rows together on my ironing board. The next step to make this go so much easier, which is the first step that we skipped and went on to the next, is measuring. So I'm going to take my tape measure and I'm going to line this end up with the end of this block. And I'm just going to pass this down all the way to the end and look at my number. And it looks like it's 40 1/2. So I'm going to move this, pull this one down, and I'm going to see what this block measures. So I'm going to line it up at the end, come down to the end, 40 1/2. So that means we need to cut our panel. So this and this I'm just going to set aside for now so that we can cut our panel into a square that is 40 1/2 inches. Alright, here is the panel. It is pressed, and I have the whole thing open at this moment. So here's the panel. We're going to cut this panel by folding it in half. So we're going to change the camera angle for you to see. Don't mind my messy room in this angle. Alright, we're going to match up the selvages. This is how we're going to get this to be 40 1/2. So I'm going to line up the selvages very nicely. Just like this. Perfect, perfect, perfect. I use my fingernails to kind of slide it. And then I'm going to fold the whole thing on top of itself, matching up the selvage the second time. And then I'm going to take and hold it nicely and just shake it out to where it's nice and flat. And it looks like it's very crooked. It is a very crooked panel. So we're going to uncrooked that panel. Alright, so I'm just lining it up to get away the not so flat panel. Alright. Now it should be flat. There we go. Perfect. And this step works with any panel. Alright, so you know the distance that your panel needs to be. I am going to line this fold up, and since both these folds match, I'm going to line them up with a line on my cutting mat. Okay, so they're exact right there. We're going to make sure that everything is laying exact. Smooth it out. Both these folds are exactly on my line right here in the front where you can't see. So both of the folds are exactly lined up right here. Okay, that way you can see. And I'm going to come over from that starting line to 20 1/4. Sorry for that. I'm going to come over 20 1/4 because that 20 20 and 20 is 40, and 1/4 1/4 is 1/2. So we're going to come 20 1/4. And I am going to line it up just like this and just like that. And we're going to cut 20 1/4. So I'm going to take this bottom piece. Don't need that. Now we're going to do the same thing with the opposite direction. So I'm going to turn the whole thing. I'm going to lay this fold on the line just like this. I want that whole entire fold on the line on my mat. Okay, and it's still folded in half. We're going to come over 20 1/4 again. And I am making sure this line is exact, this line is exact, and the 20 1/4 is lined up. And make the cut. Discard this. And now we should have a 40 1/2 by 40 1/2 inch panel. And to know that we have that correct, we're going to take a row that we just sewed together. Let's take one of the rows for now. Set that aside. And we're going to lay it across here, just like this. And if you lay it down and it's exactly the same size, put it right sides together and sew it on. For this step, that's all I'm going to do. So I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way across this, and you can see it's exactly the same size on both ends. So let's go to the sewing machine and sew this. All right, here we are at the machine. We're going to start out at this end. Just going to keep everything nice. Line it up. I did not pin anything. There's no need for it. Everything's exactly the same size it needs to be. I'm going to back stitch, lay it on my lap, and line it up and stitch on down. This can be done with any panel. You make all your blocks and measure the blocks together first before you add your panel. So again, just going to come here to my end. I'm going to hold that in my hand, keeping it all nicely together. And you can see it matches right up. I'm going to back stitch. And there I have one side on my panel. So I'm going to go ahead and press this towards the panel and I'll be right back. Now that the one side is on, it's time to turn the whole thing around and add the other side. So all I'm going to do is take that row that I made and got my measurement off of, and I'm going to attach it right on this side. So it doesn't really matter which way I put it, as long as it matches up. And you can see both ends are matching beautifully. Look at how that just lays so flat. So let's go over to the sewing machine and sew that up. Or we could just go right here. So again, lining it up nicely right here. I'm going to back stitch. I'm also going to rethread my machine. Alright, that is sewn together. Again, I'm going to press it towards the panel because there is no seams in that panel, so everything will lay nice and flat. And we'll come back with the next step. Okay, the next step is quite simple. We have all these blocks left over. We're just going to take 5 of them. 6 of them, sorry. 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to add that one to be the 6th, and we're going to go 5 and 6. We're going to swap out this for that. There we go. That's equal now. Okay, so now we're just going to sew 6 of them together. The easiest way to do that is to find which way one side starts on the quilt, and what I mean by that is take a look at your quilt top, and you can see there is a side-to-side seam. So this one will go this way. Then the next one will go this way. And the rest you're not going to see on camera. So if you had it of a straight seam here, this will have the seams, then a no seam, you know, the seams on the side, then no seam, then seams on the side, no seam, no seam, seams on the side. And if you can see, this is seams on the side and this is no seams on the side. So it's going to start and end properly. Let's get to the sewing machine. We're going to hook them end to end, just like this, same as before. Once pressed, make sure one more time it's the direction that you want it to be. We're going to put it right sides together, and the only seams that you need to match are the seams between this block and your panel, and then on the other side between the block and the panel. So those are just going to lay right together. And while I'm right here, I might as well make sure that these seams are fully laid down. So at this step you can actually add a pin between this if you want, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to hold it, take it to the machine. It's exactly the size it needs to be. Now to press it towards the panel and repeat the other step of adding the next row. Alright, so here is the top. You can see it all blends with that center panel, but you can make your center panel anything you want. Honestly, this pattern works for anything as long as you piece the four together first so that you can get an accurate number of what it's going to be from one to the other point before you add anything else. So that helps. Yeah, so let's get on to quilting this, because I have my backing fabric right here and I just need to grab some batting and piece this together and load it on the long arm and quilt away. So now that we've made our quilt top and we pieced our quilt back, it's time to quilt the quilt. So no matter which way you have to quilt this, I have a long arm, you might have sit down, or you're just a little domestic machine. Let's quilt our quilts. So now you watched me load the quilt, and now it's time to baste it onto the frame. So it's loaded, and now I just need to tack stitch it on down. I did use a 1/4 inch loft poly for this because I really wanted it to have some oomph with the quilting, since I decided to go with the color Hope, which is a neon pink thread, and you guys are going to love it. So I'm gonna go ahead now and baste this and get to quilting it. So now that it's done, we just need to pull it off the frame. Okay, so the quilt has been quilted. Now it is time to trim it and bind it. And I already have binding right here. So all I need to do now is trim the whole quilt, which is super easy to do, and then bind it. So let's show you how to trim a quilt. I'm gonna start off by finding the end of the quilt that had the most fabric. And I am just going to slide it here on my table, just like this. I'm gonna find a ruler and a cutter. What I'm gonna do is come to the very end where there's a nice straight line right here, and I'm gonna cut this end. I'm also lining up my ruler with the other side, so I'm creating a square grid right here, and then making my cuts. And I'm gonna cut away the biggest part first. That way I can save that for something else. So I just line the ruler up with the edge of the quilt and make my cuts. And again, when I get to this side, I'm gonna line up my lines on my ruler with the edge of the quilt, and I'm going to make a cut and then do that right there. So now I have a nice big chunk of fabric left over that could be used for a table runner, or if you wanted, you could use it for the binding. This project came with binding, so this will just get used for something else. I'm just gonna fold it up and stick it out of the way. And now I'm gonna work on the sides. So I'm just gonna turn the whole quilt, just like this. And I'm gonna repeat those steps. I'm gonna line my ruler up on the straight line with the quilt top, and then I'm gonna line it up with the side. So I'm just gonna line everything up, just like this, making sure that it's nice and straight. And then make my cuts. Oops. It's nice to have a bigger table to be able to do this, but if you don't, this could also be done on the floor with your cutting mat underneath, or you can do this from a smaller table on a smaller cutting mat. I used to do that before I got this big table. And I save all this scrap for other projects. Then I turn it. The quilt it finishes at 59 by 59, so it shouldn't be too hard to trim it and square it up, because it's not overly enormous. It's a perfect size little lap quilt. And it has so much loft. I love it when I quilt with the poly, because the loft is just amazing. I love the feel of it and the look of it. All right, one more side. Now I'm going to straighten this out, and when I run my ruler to the end, I'm also going to make sure that it's straight with the edge of the quilt, and it is, because it was a pretty flat square quilt, so no issues trimming it. So there we have a nice trimmed quilt top. So now to bind it. So I need to distinguish how many strips I need to bind this. And it looks like I need 1.5, 3. 1.5, 5, 6. So we're going to cut 6 strips of binding. That's 1.5 per sides, and there's 4 sides. So I'm just going to toss that out of the way, and we're going to grab our binding fabric and straighten it out really nicely. And I like to do 2.5-inch strips. A lot of people do 2 1/4. I do 2 1/4 when it's a show quilt and I'm wanting it to be perfect. But for stuff like this, I just do 2.5-inch strips. So we're gonna go ahead and straighten this out. And I'm gonna go turn it like this and cut 2.5-inch strips. So I'm going to cut 6 of them. And then we're going to hook them together end to end and then press. Same with any binding, but I will show you how in just a few minutes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is number 6. I'm going to straighten this out down here. And just because I have a little bit left, I'm going to cut that into a 2.5-inch strip as well, because there's enough for 1 more. And you never know, I may need 1 more and just not know it, because I'm not very good at calculating my binding. All right, let's go to the machine and stitch these binding strips together. Now that we've cut our strips, let's sew these together and make one really long strip. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take and open up one of them, grab a second one and open it up for our binding. And we're gonna put these right sides together in the shape of an L. And I'm going to sew from this corner right here to this corner down here. And I probably should have pressed those ends first, but I did not. We're just going to sew from corner to corner. And I use the diagonal seam tape to make it easier on me. Then we're going to bring up the next one and grab another strip. And we're going to hook those together, right sides together. I'm lining up just beyond the selvage, just like this, so you can see I'm not wasting much when I go to cut it away. Line it up, sew it, and repeat until they are all sewn together. Now that they're all sewn together, we're going to bring the ends over here and we're going to trim away the excess right here. I use a ruler and a rotary cutter for this part, but you can do it with scissors if you want. So a 1/4 inch seam, a 1/4 inch away from the seam that you just created or your stitch line, line it up. That way you can have a nice straight piece. So go ahead and do that to all of them. Once you have it all sewn together and you have one really long strip, we're going to come over here to the iron and we're going to press this in half. So this is how you make binding. So we start out at one end and we're going to fold it in half, wrong sides together, like this. So go ahead and fold it wrong sides together, hold it, place your iron on it, And I just keep a thumb in between and my first finger to adjust it as I go all the way down, folding it in half just like this. And when I get to a seam, I just roll that seam one way before I press it in half, so that way it's folded down and out of the way. And just keep going until it's done. I'm going to put you in fast forward while I complete this process. Alright, so the binding is made. It's now time to attach it to the quilt. So what we need to do is take the end and we need to take the quilt. So here is the back of the quilt. And I always attach it to the back and then go around to, and then once it's sewn on, flip it around to the front. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the opening side of my binding and I'm going to place it along the edge of the quilt. And I'm also going to come along here and see if there's a seam at the end, and no, there's not. I tried. If you don't start with one at the end, usually one doesn't end up in a corner, but sometimes it happens. It happens more often than not lately though for me, but anyway. Let's go ahead and we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to sew this on here, leaving a tail to attach together, and we're going to sew it on here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to fold it to the front, and I'm going to show you how both steps. Here we are at the machine. I have my quilt, my back side is facing me, and I'm going to take my binding, we're going to lay it on here, and we're going to leave a tail that's about, I don't know, 10 inches. Then we're going to lay this on the edge. Remember, we want the open side facing out. Just going to lay it right here. And with a 1/4 inch seam, I have a seam guide, so it shouldn't be too hard. We're just going to stitch it. And I'm using about a 2.5 stitch length for this. We're just going to sew all the way around, attaching the binding to the back first, which I find easier. You can do it to the front first and then roll it to the rear. That's all dependent on how you want to do it. And a lot of people hand bind. So again, it's your choice how you do this. This is just how I do it and how I think it looks really good. And notice I am using the same color thread that I quilted with. It's called Hope. It's a very bright pink color. So as we come up to this corner, I'm going to stop a 1/4 inch away from the edge. If you do not know where that 1/4 inch away from the edge is, you could always mark it or put a pin in it. I'm so used to doing this that I'm, good at guessing. And then I back stitch. So I stopped a 1/4 inch away from the edge. So here's my edge right here. There's where I stopped. There's the edge of the quilt. Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to pull it to my right side. So I'm just going to go up and over to the right side. And you can see that it creates a nice straight line between the quilt and the end of the binding. So I'm just going to crease it so that it has a 45-degree angle. And then what I'm going to do is I stick my 2 fingers at the edge of the quilt, and then I fold it over onto itself, remove my fingers, and I have my corner nice and square. So as I hold that in place, I just turn the whole thing. I want to make sure my thread stays threaded. And then come in from the end and stitch it on there. While the needle is down and it's being held in place, I just adjust the quilt, and then I continue on to that next corner. And I'll repeat the same process 3 more times. Alright, here we are at the end of the binding. What we need to do now is make these ready to fit each other. So I'm going to go ahead and take my scissors, and I'm going to come about right here and cut a straight line. So I just cut that much off of my hanging. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my ruler, which is 2.5 inches by the way, right here on the edge of that. So I'm going to smooth it out. It's going to go right there on the edge. And since I'm working from the opposite side, I need to come to the opposite side here. And it's all nicely lined up. Let me cut about 1/8 of an inch off of this to straighten it up. Every once in a while I have to do that because I did cut from the wrong direction. I usually cut in this way from things. Alright, I'm going to take the other side now. I'm going to make sure it's nice and straightened out. I got this ruler laying on the edge. So it is on the edge. Right there, as you can see. And I'm going to take this second piece now, and I'm going to lay it on top like this, and I'm going to hold it still. I'm going to take my scissors, I'm holding the ruler and my top piece, and I'm going to go in between the 2 pieces to the edge of the ruler and then cut it off. So I went in between the pieces to the edge of the ruler and then cut it off. And then the second thing I do is I straighten it up. You can use a ruler for that part and a rotary cutter, but I'm pretty good with the aligning it and getting it right. And even if not, I'll have a tiny little pucker at my end. So, alright, so now that that's together, we're going to take this to the sewing machine. We're going to open this one up like this, and we're going to open this one up like that. And we're going to put them on top of each other, just like this. So again, the one that's on the top just opens out like this. The one that's on the bottom just opens like this. We put them right sides together, and we're going to be sewing on the diagonal. So let's take this over to the machine so I can show you what I mean. Okay, here we are at the machine. I'm going to move my seam guide out of the way. So here's the bottom one, here's the top one. Just going to take this top one and open it up. Then I'm going to bring this bottom one up to me, And now I'm going to open it up like this. And I'm going to lay it on top of there. So as you can see, one opens to the top, one opens to the bottom. And what I'm going to do is line up the corner, and I'm going to sew from here to this corner down here at that tip. So I'm going to go ahead and change my stitch length for this. I'm going to put my foot down, take a couple of stitches real quick, then align the piece back up. Now you could put some pins in here if you need. I'm just going to line this up and hold it. Sometimes you just need to squish the quilt a little bit so that everything stays nice and together. So you can see I have sewn from this corner to this corner from the under piece. And then I always straighten it out first and go, hey, look at that, it looks great, before I cut away my excess at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So a 1/4 inch away from that stitching, I come in with my scissors and just manually cut that away, and then I finger press it to one side or the other. In this case, it wants to go towards the bottom piece. And then I return my seam guide, so that way I have a consistent 1/4 inch seam. Take a few stitches, and then go right back to sewing it, just like this, and I'm going to cross over about 1 inch into my starting stitches, and there we have it. It is ready to turn to the other side. So this part is quite simple. You just flip the whole thing over, just like this. Move the seam guide because now I don't need it, and I'm going to change my stitch length on my machine to a 3. It's about 10 stitches per inch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my binding and grab it from the underside like this, and I'm going to pull it around to the front. I'm going to put it under, and I'm going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge all the way around. So I just lining it up. I usually take my fingernail and rub it against that edge, and I go all the way around. And I'm just going to rub my finger down it. I use one hand to pull it out, one hand to finger along that edge, and sew all the way down, finger along the edge. And then I just do it all the way until I get to a corner. I usually use my fingers to hold it down as I go. Alright, here at the corner, there's 2 ways you can do this. You could fold the edge like this, down first, and then pull the bottom up to it to create your 45-degree miter, just like that, and then sew into it. Or you can fold your bottom up first and go the opposite direction, like this. It doesn't matter which way I do it, they all come out equally. So I'm just going to go into that corner. I'm holding this side down because I have the bottom up. I always do 1 stitch in and 1 stitch out at the corner so that it's fully held down. And then I turn the whole entire thing. So it doesn't matter whether you lift it up or you fold it down at that 45-degree miter, as long as you miter it. So I'm going to go ahead and put you in fast forward while I stitch this on. And here we have the finished quilt. So here it is. It's 59 by 59. So it is a square quilt. Those are all the blocks. All the way around. You can see the quilting in that bright pink thread called Hope. And as you saw during the quilting, a black light highlights it. Alright, so there's the whole thing. You can't even tell that that's a panel in the middle because the panel matches the fabric, so it lines up just right and gives it that extra flair. Let's take a look at the back. And there we have the back. From here you really can't tell anything, but when we go up close, you can see all the prettiness of that fabric. And you can also see the quilting. Sort of. You could sort of see the quilting. So there we have it. You can see that the binding is along the edge. On the front side it's thicker, so it gives it that added border kind of look. I did add my tag, as well as I named it Flower Garden. It's very pretty. Looks great. And there we have it. A nice finished quilt. So I want to thank you guys for watching. This is Town Square by Bear Hug Quiltworks. So you can go to bearhugquiltworks.com to find the pattern. This is what it looks like. It came out beautiful. And again, this is also an idea of what you can do with a panel and some matching fabric. So hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.